Hello again. I'm going to tell you about the story of one of the most magical nights of my life. And if not my life, definitely the most magical night along the Camino de Santiago. I illustrate and animate short stories for my travel adventures, so quickly hit subscribe to see more coming up. I think the first time I ever heard about the Camino de Santiago was from my friend Sarah, who had walked just a week of it while in university. Like any great adventure I hear about, I stored it away in the back of my mind, hoping one day I could also live to walk the Camino. If you've never heard of the Camino de Santiago, it literally means the way of Santiago. In English, Santiago is James, and it's said that in 44 AD, St. James was beheaded on his way to Jerusalem. And so his followers buried him in what is present-day Santiago de Compostela in the northwest region of Spain called Galicia. When his remains were rediscovered in the 9th century, a shrine was created and thousands of followers began to walk there from all across Europe, creating numerous ways, all converging in Santiago de Compostela. What began as a religious journey for devout followers hundreds of years ago is now a well-traveled path for the religious and adventurous alike. In 2014, I felt stagnant. I had been living in my hometown for a year after several years abroad. I was uninspired. I missed the road. So I quit my job and booked a flight to Spain with my roommate Sky. 1 week before we were to start the Camino, Sky backed out and flew to Berlin, and I took a BlaBlaCar to Pamplona, which is where I started my Camino. I arrived the evening before with the intention of traveling to Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port the next day on the other side of the Pyrenees in France to start. But as soon as I arrived in Pamplona, I saw the other pilgrims, their walking sticks, their boots, their backpacks, their excitement. So right then and there, I said, fuck it. I woke up the next morning early. And like starting any new habit, I was timid, meticulous in preparation. I nervously stepped out of the hostel into the empty morning Pamplona streets, looking for my first shell, my first sign, my first arrow to point me in the right direction towards Santiago. I walked fast at first, excited. The late October morning was cold, but not too cold. My shoes were stiff, but I kept telling myself they would be fine. I had trained in them several times before the trip, and I knew they would break in eventually. I met my first friends. Nico, a Spaniard who had tried to do the Camino several years before and failed to finish. He didn't know yet that this year too he would also fail. Then there was Leo, an Italian guy with glasses, dark curly hair, and the heaviest backpack of anyone I would ever meet on the Camino. 20 kilometers after Pamplona, we decided to stop. That night I chatted with other pilgrims, wrote in my journal, and attended to my newly forming blisters with a needle and thread. The next few days proved to me that my shoes would not break in, and maybe not ever. I had blisters on my big toes, my little toes, the heels and balls of my feet. So on day 3, I bought new shoes. Terribly ugly, grandpa-looking shoes with Velcro tops, but which felt like walking on clouds in comparison. But my blisters didn't stop. I attended to them at each new place I stopped, learning tips and tricks from other pilgrims.
Wear 2 pairs of socks.
No, wear just one.
Put Vaseline on your feet.
Use Band-Aids.
Use Compeed.
Use iodine.
Use a needle and thread.
Nothing worked. On day 5, I walked with Tom, the Canadian man, tall as he was shy. Eventually, Filippo, who was to become my closest friend on the Camino, caught up with us. Filippo was an Italian musician with wild curly hair and a wide open heart. 5 kilometers before reaching Grañón, where we wanted to sleep that night, my feet started hurting, worse than ever this time. Every step hurt. The pressure on my blisters. Filippo lent me his walking sticks, and for the last hour and a half before reaching Grañón, I would use them like crutches, putting pressure on the sticks with each step to ease the blisters and just hoping they wouldn't burst. Finally, we arrived to San Juan Bautista Church, which is supposedly the first church that ever started allowing pilgrims to sleep in it along the Camino. We took our shoes off at the bottom of the winding staircase and then walked up several floors to a small room in a tower where we lay out our sleeping bags. In the main room of the church, there was a kitchen and a large community table and a fireplace. The hosts of this church offered us coffee and tea immediately. They were incredibly gracious and kind hosts. I sat down at the large table to begin my daily blister duty. I got out my thread, my needles, my tissues. And as I began, 4 Spanish guys came in adorned in full spandex. They were biking the Camino. They sat down at the table to have coffee. The group's leader started talking to me, asking me about my blisters. He said that he had done the Camino a few years ago by foot. This year he was cycling it, so he wouldn't be able to sleep that night at San Juan Bautista, but he did want to stop to show his cycling buddies the church, because it was magical, he told me. It cured him. After spending the night there, he had no more blisters for the rest of his trip. After the Spaniards finished their coffee, they went back downstairs to get on their bikes and continue their journey. That evening, we all sat around the living room next to the fireplace while one of the hosts prepared dinner. Filippo, me, Nico, Tom, Elena, an Italian university student from Milan, Leonardo, a young Italian chef, Nicola, an Italian master of snoring, and Anna, a fitness instructor from Mallorca. Leo with the heavy backpack sat next to me, asking me about verb conjugations in Spanish and writing down new words that he had heard. We all chatted and laughed and drank red wine until dinner was ready. The smell of fresh bread and warm soup brought us to the table where we stayed for the next few hours, chatting and laughing and getting to know each other. After dinner, we expected to do what we always did at night: hang out, read, write, chat. But then the priest came in, aptly named Jesus, and he wanted us to follow him. Admittedly, I was reluctant. I was tired and always skeptical of anything religious. But we followed him. We entered onto a balcony overlooking the church pulpit and rows of pews. The 3 remaining walls of the balcony were lined with these giant wooden chairs carved into the walls. Jesus asked us to sit down, and then he lit candles and turned off the lights. He had these small books of prayers written in all of our native languages. So, alternating readers in a circle, we read our parts of the prayer: English, Spanish, Italian, French. Then the priest asked us to go in a circle and share something with the group in whichever language we chose: a poem, a prayer, a story, why we are here, why we chose to do the Camino. I really didn't know what to say. I didn't know why. I wasn't religious. It wasn't a religious pilgrimage for me. It was part adventure, but more than anything, I just needed to do it. I felt deep down that I was meant to. The way some are called to prayer, I felt called to walk, to the journey of doing something that took time to process. I had just spent 18 months back in my hometown after years abroad where I struggled finding any purpose in my job or my life there before just quitting to go back on the road. I was also struggling with my relationship with my father, who was at the time in the middle of a mental breakdown, though our relationship had been suffering already for years. I wasn't sure if I was going towards something or escaping from something else, but in that moment, I knew that there in that church in Grañón, in the middle of northern Spain, surrounded by strangers who became family, that was exactly where I needed to be. After sharing our stories, Jesus asked us to stand up and hug everyone. Tell everyone, "Buen camino," he said, not just on the trail, but in our lives. We all hugged each other on this balcony in the candlelight. And just when we thought the moment was over, Jesus suddenly had a guitar in his hand, seemingly to appear out of nowhere. He held it up, looking around the room.
"There is always someone who plays guitar,"
he told us, pleased with himself. And, of course, Jesus was right. Elena, the Italian student, played a few songs, and then it was Filippo's turn. As I listened to Filippo play The Song of the Sun by Lucio Battisti for the first of many times in my life, I could feel the energy running through that balcony between us in this shared moment, and I could feel so many pieces of me starting to heal. That night, we all went back to the tower where our sleeping bags lay out on the floor next to each other and tried to fall asleep as quickly as we could before Nicola, our campion, began his nightly round of snoring. The next morning, I woke up early and began to walk west, alone, with the sunrise at my back and the last of my blisters drying up. I would never have another blister for the remaining 20 days of my Camino. Behind me, fading into the distance, was San Juan Bautista, the first to accept pilgrims and the magical healer of wounds. Thank you for watching my story, written and illustrated by me, Nikki Post, at Sketchbook Travel. If you want to see my disaster on an Indian train, click here.